Hey, Rabbi, we're going to start now. I made a little mistake. I'm sorry. I announced 11:15, but it's really 11 o'clock. But we had to get everything set up. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Again, I'd like to thank the technical staff, Major Fain, Aaron Gross, Adam Whitton, Jeffrey Silverman. We had a little issue about the microphone being missing, but obviously that happens, and Jeffrey and his wife quickly remedied that situation. Also, I'd like to really thank the Schenker and the Kirschberg family, who Rob and his family came from the Valley to hear Rabbi Goldberg, and there's so many people here to hear Rabbi Goldberg. It just shows the love and affection and the relationship that he's developed, and that's what this success of the school, Rabbi Goldberg, is because he cares. And that's why he's the perfect person to speak today for us and Tisha B'Av. And his topic will be Bitachon Shel Reshayim. We would like to thank Rabbi Goldberg not only for this year, but for everything he does for Klal Yisrael and our community.
By means of introduction, before I get to the major topic that I wanted to address today, first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Summers as well for everything that he does and for providing a venue for people who are seeking the Devar Hashem to have a place, a comfortable and growing place to bring their tzonos and their efforts. Yesterday was the yard site of my Rabbi, Moshe Cheit, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha. And while I'm going to share something in terms of an introduction, which is not something that, it's not a drasha that he said, but it's something that he stood for. And I think it will serve as a good introduction to the topic that I wanted to address today. There's a Gemara in Masechta Sanhedrin, it's Gemara in Brachos also, but the Marshal that I want to quote is found in Masechta Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi Beis. This is not on the sheets that I handed out. The Gemara there in Sanhedrin says, Kol Adam she'ein lo deya. Any person that doesn't have deya, any person, will define it for our purposes today, that any person who doesn't think, asur l'rachim alav. So it's forbidden to have rachmanas on that person. That sounds quite strict. Not having Rahmanas is, the implications of that, of course, are quite severe, because we know that we all live with Rachmei Shemayim, and we need to be worthy of that, and to think that there could be something we could do that could hold back that Rachamim, so that's obviously quite strict. By the way, in terms of Rachmei Shemayim, I did want to dedicate the Shira today for Shlomo for Eliezer Shmuel ben Chanayita. It's Rabbi Eivitz's son-in-law, who is indeed in need of Rachmei Shemayim. So we should please keep his name in our thoughts today. So a person who has no deya, asur l'rachim alav. It's strict, but it's a pasuk. The Gemara in Sanhedrin there quotes the pasuk, says, Ki lo am binos hu, because this nation is not a nation of binos, it's not a nation of understanding. Al kain lo yirachamenu osehu. Therefore, the one who created them, Hashem, will not have rachmanas upon them. So it's a pasuk. A person who doesn't think, a person who doesn't have deya, asur l'rachim alav. The Marshal poses a question on that Gemara, and it should be a relatively obvious one for anyone, certainly who daven Shachris. There's a kasha for something that we said twice already this morning. In Ashrei, we say about Hashem, V'rachamov al kol ma'asav, that Hashem's rachmanis is on all his creation. So if it's true that Rachamov al kol ma'asav, that Hashem has mercy on everything that he created, then why should it be that a person who doesn't have deya doesn't get rachmanis? Rachamov al kol ma'asav. Hashem has mercy on everyone. So why is it that the Gemara can say that a person doesn't have daya, he doesn't get Rahmanas? So the Maharsha answers the question with an answer which is of necessity true. It's what we in the yeshiva call mukhrach. There's no denying this. The Maharsha says that if both the pasuk and the Gemara are true, there's only one conclusion. If Hashem is racham al kol ma'asav, He has mercy on everyone, on all His ma'asav, and a person who is ein bodeya, a person who doesn't have das, who doesn't think, doesn't get mercy, the only way to understand that is to say that a human being, an adam, that doesn't think, is not considered ma'asav. The pasuk says, "V'racham al kol ma'asav." Hashem has mercy on everything that He created, on all His ma'asav. So, if a person who doesn't have das doesn't get rahmanas, the only conclusion is that by not thinking, he is no longer considered ma'asav. He's not the way Hashem made him. I'll give you an example. It's an example I use in other contexts. In the old days, not such old days, there used to be something called a circus. It's probably better they don't have them anymore. One of the things that they had at a circus was that you could have an elephant that was able to balance on a ball. You could train an elephant to balance on a ball. The only thing is, in order to get an elephant to bounce on a ball, you have to make that elephant not an elephant. Because no self-respecting elephant is going to balance on a ball. So the first thing you have to do is break his spirit. So he might weigh 5 tons. He might, no matter where he's got a trunk, he's got a tail, he's got, big feet. Looks like an elephant, but an elephant that balances on a ball is not an elephant. It's missing something in the essential way that Hashem made it, because elephants, as an elephant, does not balance. He's not a mode of entertainment. He doesn't balance on a ball. I'm not sure how true this is really, but at least in lore, dogs chase cats. You have a dog that doesn't chase a cat, so he might, bark. He might have a fluffy tail, but he doesn't chase cats. So that's not a dog. Cats chase mice. If you have a cat that's not interested in chasing mice, not because they're like the rats here in LA, which are bigger than the cat, but he doesn't chase mice. So, okay, he looks like a cat. He's soft and furry and meows, but he doesn't chase mice. It's not the way Hashem made a cat. Hashem made a cat to chase mice. Hashem made human beings to chase meaning. Hashem created human beings, Adam. He created us that we're supposed to find reasons and meaning and purpose behind the things that happen to us. So if you have a person, she'ein bo deya, he doesn't have das, he's a person who doesn't think, then a person who doesn't think, and it's interesting, the Gemara says, kol adam she'ein bo deya. If he wants to pretend that he's an adam, he wants to pretend he's a person, but he doesn't think, so arsul rachim alav, because he's not ma'asav, he's not an adam. That's not the way Hashem made him. Hashem created us, as it says in Parshas Bereshis, that human beings are made. I see there's someone trying to get in. I have a view to the back door. Hashem made human beings. Adam Rishon was given nefesh chaya. Rashi says nefesh chaya, the living soul, which was something that was given to animals also. Rashi explains that man was given something above and beyond what the animals got. 2 things. Deya, the dibur, the ability to speak, to communicate, and deya, the ability to think. So if a person is not using the gifts that Hashem gave him, he's not using his dibur correctly, or he's not using his deya, he's not thinking, so then that person is not ma'asav. He's not the way Hashem made him, and therefore the Gemara in Sanhedrin can say, asur l'rachim alav, even though rachim alav kol ma'asav, but he's not ma'asav. Because you're not the human being that Hashem made, like the elephant on the ball, or a dog that doesn't chase a cat, or a cat that doesn't chase a mouse. That's not the way Hashem made us. Hashem made us to run after and pursue meaning. Rav Hutner Zechut Tzarech L'Vracha said that a person has the ability to give a context to the isurim that they suffer in life. Lo aleinu. But everybody in life has some sort of challenge, some sort of difficulties. There are a lot of moments of pleasure. There are some moments of pain. He says a person has the ability to give a context to those Yisurim. He says if a person, Rahman al-Islam, has Yisurim coming upon him, and he thinks about why is this happening, so by thinking about why, by searching his deeds, so then when he thinks about it and tries to find meaning, he turns those Yisurim into Yisurim Shel Ahava. Those Yisurim are Yisurim of Ahava. Hashem's trying to get our attention to help us to improve and to help us to grow. But if we have difficulties that come upon us and we just ignore them, we don't think about them, then there's stam, a punishment. It's just pain. It's Yisurim, and it doesn't become Yisurim Shel Ahava. That doesn't mean that it's easy to figure out. Even when we think, it's not easy to come to the right conclusions as to why this is happening. And I mention this today in terms of an introduction because there's so much that's happening. There's so much that's happening into the Jewish world in general. There's so much that's happening in terms of individual Jews and their difficulties. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of things that we can definitely put into the category of Yisurim, last year and a half, last couple of years, last few months in particular. So we would like at best to be able to turn this into Yisurim Shel Ahava. We have to be able to think about it, but it's not. So we have to think, why is it happening to the Klal Yisrael? And why is it happening to me? To the extent that I'm affected by it, what lesson was I supposed to learn? Because if we take Moron, for example, so if we felt something over there, Hashem had the feeling of pain that we were going to experience, that was in his calculation of why he made it happen. That was part of it. There's the people who suffered far more great, terrible things. But the fact that we were affected, we were hurt by it, that was also part of the cheshbon. So we have to think, why? What am I supposed to learn from that? But it's not always easy to come to the right conclusion. Rabbi Victor Miller said about that, however, that let's say you have a person who has, he gets a bad cold sore, on his mouth. And he comes to the conclusion that it's because he spoke Lashon Hara. The truth is, he got that sore in his mouth. If we were Hashem, we would know that he got that sore on his mouth because he says brachas without kavanah. He's using his lips and his tongue in a way that has no meaning behind it. So he thought it was Lashon Hara. It was really because of the way he says brachas. Rabbi Miller compared it to a person who goes panning for gold and he comes up with silver. Okay, I didn't get the gold. I thought about it, and maybe I came to the wrong conclusion, but I still found a way to grow. I still learned something from it. So it might not have been the thing, but the fact that I came up with a way to improve, I put some thought into it, already made me worthy of Hashem's Rahmanas. I'll give you another example. It's a story that I think has very profound implications. Rabbi Orlowick one time decided that he was going to leave a particular yeshiva where he was a Rabbi or Mashgiach. And he thought it out, and he talked to great people, and he came to the conclusion that was no longer a position for him, he needed to move on. Right after he made the decision that he was going to stop working at that institution, he received a phone call from the father of a boy who learned there to tell Rabbi Orlowick what a profound roshem, what an amazing impact and impression he has had on his son's life and how he totally turned him around. So here it is, he thought about it, he came up with a conclusion that he has to leave, and he gets a sign, min hashamayim, that right then, like within minutes of having made that decision, he gets a phone call from a father of a boy who'd been positively affected by him. So what did Rabbi Orlowick do? He went to Reb Zelig Weinberg. Reb Zelig Weinberg we knew him from Esha Torah. He was a Shlomo Chassid and a brisk Rosh Kol. So he asked him, he said, Reb Zelig, tell me, is this a sign? So Reb Zelig said, it's a sign that you have to think it through again. Okay, pay attention to this. I call this an opposite of Hasidic Maisa. Okay, this is an opposite. In a regular Hasidic Maisa, so it would have been, and he got a sign, and he stayed, and he, so this is a Litvish Maisa. Even though Reb Zelek is a Chassid. Okay? He said it's a sign that you need to think it through again. So Rabbi thought it through again, and he spoke to the people again, and he made the calculations, and he came to the same conclusion, and he left that yeshiva. Because that's the way Jews do. We think. So nothing had changed. Okay, this man had called, okay, that's true, but compared to all the other reasons that he had calculated that would call upon him to do something different, it didn't outweigh that. So the conclusion that he came to remained the conclusion. It's not always easy to know what to do. It's not easy to read Hashgacha. That does not putter us from the obligation to try. So we find ourselves in a situation where the Klal Yisrael is experiencing Yisurim. When the Klal Yisrael suffers, so individuals suffer. In addition, there are many people who are going through difficult times right now. I know from times that I've spoken in the past, if you have a group of 50 people and you ask who considers that they're going through a significant life crisis at this point in time, you'll probably get 70% of the people who raise their hands. That's on a normal day. That was before COVID and before the events of the last several months. So there's things going on. We have an obligation to think and to try to figure it out, even though it's difficult to come to absolute. Can we know for sure it's the right conclusion? No. Does that pater us from going through the processes which are necessary to try to figure it out for ourselves? To think? We have to think. Because if there was ever a time that we needed Hashem's Rachmanis, it's now. And remember, Hashem's Rachmanis only comes to people who are ma'asov, and in order to be ma'asov, according to the Heilige Marsha, so you have to be a person who thinks. You have to at least try. The remainder of what I wish to speak about today is something to keep in your mind while you're thinking. Because especially when a person considers Yisurim, we think of challenges, which is what really this day is about. When we think about the hard times, it's easy for a person to feel yish. We can give up hope. We can think that we are not deserving. And that probably is the cruelest trick of the Yetzer Hara of all. So in addition to our obligation to think and to not be Pollyannish in terms of the things that are coming upon us, I see there's another person at the door. We have to know at the same time that as we're thinking it through, and the conclusions that we might come to as to our potential worthiness of Hashem's mercy, as long as we are in the category of thinkers, and we're going to add one more category as we continue this morning, we can rest assured that we will be deserving of Hashem's Rahmanas. If you'll take a look at the first of the Mar Makomos that I shared, I'd like to propose a contradiction. It's not my contradiction. I felt embarrassed that it wasn't my contradiction, because sometimes you see a question that's brought and you say, how could it be that I learn this every year and I didn't ask this question? So this was one of the times that I had that feeling, but this is a question that was posed by Rabbi Rucham, the great Mashgiach of Demir. In Parsha Shoftim, the Torah discusses what happens in the process of Jews going out to fight a war. Who was selected as a soldier, who was allowed to fight, who was not allowed to fight. And in that discussion, the Torah says the following. It says, "V'hayah b'karvechem el ha-milchama," when you will come close to approaching to fight a war, v'nigash ha-kohen, so the kohen will approach, v'diber el ha'am, and he'll speak to the people. So you have soldiers, potential soldiers who are going out to fight a war, and they're going to be spoken to by the kohen Meshuach Milchama. And he says, V'omar aleha. He says to the people, Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael. Atem krevim hayom milchama. You're going to have to go and fight a war now. Al oivechem, on your enemies. Therefore he says, Al yerech levavchem. Do not allow your heart to become softened. Va'al tiru'u, and don't be afraid. Va'al tachpezu, And don't be panicked, va'al taratzu, or don't be in dread of them. You don't have to be afraid. It's a war, but you don't have to be afraid. Why not? Because Hashem, your God, is going to go with you to fight for you against your enemies, and He'll save you. So it's a war. War is scary. Person has a right to be afraid, but the people are told you have to be afraid. Because Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael, Hashem is going to fight for you. You'll be okay. On that, Rashi says something incredible. Remember, the pasuk says, "V'yamar alehem Shema Yisrael." Listen, Yisrael. Why were those words chosen to be the introduction for the Kohen's speech? So Rashi says, "Shema Yisrael, afilu ein b'chem schus ela kriya Shema bilvad." Even if the only schus that you have, and the Gemara in Sota explains this, that the only thing you do is you say Kriya Shema in the morning and you say Kriya Shema in the afternoon. That's your entire connection to Torah and mitzvahs. Kedai atem sheyoshi eschem. So that makes you worth Hashem putting forth the effort, so to speak, to save you. As long as you have Shema Yisrael in the morning, Shema Yisrael in the evening, you're okay. Rabbi Yerucham says, rest of the day, the other 612 mitzvahs, not so much. Person's Malei Averos. This is the only mitzvah he's got, is Shema Yisrael. Even if that's the situation, the only mitzvah you have is Shema Yisrael, you don't have to be afraid. Go fight the war. Hashem is going to protect you. He is going to fight for you. An amazing statement by Rashi. This is Torah Senes. It's the only thing that we need in order to be able to not be afraid and to fight the war, is that we have that one mitzvah, Shema Yisrael. So what's the difficulty? What was the contradiction? If we go on a little bit more in the story, so you find that later on, the pasuk says, a whole list of people who get to go back from the war, who don't go to fight. And one of them is Miha Ish Hayarei, who's the person who's afraid, Varach Halevav, and he's got a soft, not a courageous heart. So that person, V'yoshev L'beisai, he has to go back home. He's not allowed to go out and fight the war. Rashi says, what does it mean that he's afraid of? What's he scared of? So Rabbi Akiva said, Omer Kamashma, oh, it means exactly what it said. He's afraid of fighting in a war. He can't face a sword, it's too scary. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Omer, but Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, it's not talking about a person who's afraid of war. It's talking about a person who's afraid of fighting in the war. Hayorei me averos shabiyodai. He's afraid of the averos that he did. That person, he goes back home. So what's the contradiction? We just read that as long as you have Kriya Shema, so you can go out and fight the war. Who's the person who then gets sent back from fighting the war? A person who's afraid of the averos that he did. So, first of all you need is Kriya Shema. So he was promised, you have Kriya Shema, you can go and fight. So what's he afraid of? And secondly, where is being afraid of the averos that you did? Where do you find that to be a negative thing? I mean, if you ask me, I want to pick a soldier. I want to pick a soldier who's afraid of the averos that he did. I want a person who does an avera and says, you know what, Hashem doesn't like that so much. I need to do tshuva. I need to change. I'm afraid that my actions might have caused all this difficulty. Like we said in the keynotes this morning, that it's my ma'asim. It's what I did in tests, I believe. It's because of the things that we did that's what caused it. I want a person in the army who's the person who's afraid of the averos that are in his hand. Plus, what's the big deal with averos? As long as you have Shema, we said before, don't worry. You can be full with averos. As long as you have Shema in your side, so you're going to be okay, and Hashem's going to fight the war for you. Don't worry. So why is it that this person has to go back? In fact, we find Yaakov Avinu. If you take a look at number 2, Yaakov Avinu is about to meet up with Esav, and 400 of his best guys, Esav's best guys. So the pasuk says, "Vayar Yaakov me'od," and Yaakov was very afraid. Vayetzer lo, and therefore he takes preparations in order to be able to prepare himself for war, and he goes and fights the war. Rashi says, what was Yaakov Avinu afraid of? Yaakov said, "L'kach ani yoreh." You know why I'm afraid? Shema, maybe mi she bitchatani nischalachti. I'm sorry, I can't read what it says over here. Shema shebitachoni nislachlachti. Maybe what you promised me became solely through chet. V'yigrom li lehimaser b'yad Esav, and that's what's causing me to be handed over to Esav. So what was Yaakov Avinu afraid of? He was afraid of the averas that were in his hand. So Yaakov Avinu should have been sent back home. He shouldn't have been allowed to fight. And you see that Yaakov actually did go fight. So being afraid of the averas in your hand is actually something that's a good thing. So how do we understand these two psukim together? The one hand that says all you need is Shema, you can go out and fight a war, coupled with the one that says that if you're afraid of the averas in your hand, you have to go back and you can't fight. So how does this work? So Rabbi Yerucham explains, based on a similar concept. There's something that David HaMelech wrote in Tehillim, and the Rabbeinu Yonah explains it here. It's called V'gilu Bara'ata. That a person has to be happy. You should celebrate with trembling. Celebrate with trembling. Now for us, you should celebrate with fear. For us, that sounds like it's two things which are contradictions, celebrating with fear. How can I be happy and be afraid at the same time? The Rabbeinu Yonah explains that when you're talking about Yiras Hashem, it's not a contradiction. Because when a person has Yiras Hashem, and he's afraid of the averas that he did, and he wants to come closer to Hashem, and he works on himself, and he tries to improve. So that is the thing that brings a person to the greatest simcha. When it comes to other things, other joys, well, if I'm really worried, if I'm anxious, I can't enjoy the party. But if we're talking about Yiras Hashem, fear of doing the things that Hashem commanded me to do, and be sure that I have them right and do it right and think about them with the proper intention, and I'm working on myself to try to change, that brings a person to the greatest simcha. Rabbi Yerucham brings an example, which in this base measure we can say it, that he said there are people who think that if you learn Musar, it makes you depressed. Why do you want to learn Musar? You have to think about the averas that you did, you have to think about your shortcomings, you have to contemplate why Yisurim are coming upon you. You have to think. And we know Shlomo said, the more thinking, the more pain. In English, they say ignorance is bliss. So we say, yeah, it's true. If you think about things, so it's more difficult. But those of us, he says, who learn Musar, know that there's nothing that brings a person to greater joy than learning Musar. Feeling that you're making efforts, you're trying to move forward, that you're understanding the beauty of a chazal. You see what Hashem is trying to get across to us. You understand the love he has for us and the depth of his Torah. There's nothing that makes a person happier. The world thinks, Musar, depressing. Other ways of approaching Avodas Hashem, that makes you happy. Musar makes you sad. And those of us who learn Musar correctly, we know there's no greater joy than a beautiful shmooze. There's no greater joy than making an effort in winning that war against the Yetzer Hara. There's no contradiction. So too, the Rabbeinu Yonah explains that when a person has proper Yiras Shamayim, just as it doesn't bring him, and he might tremble a little bit from that Yiras Shamayim, but it doesn't ruin his simcha. He can still be begilu, he can still rejoice bara'ada, he can tremble because of his shortcomings, but he has simcha in life because he knows he's doing what he was created to do, which is to try to improve himself. So Rabbi Yerucham says, just like Yiras Hashem is not a contradiction to simcha, Yiras Hashem is not a contradiction to Bitachon. It's not a contradiction to trusting in Hashem. A person can be very strongly aware of the averos that he did. But Rashi tells him, you have Shema Yisrael, you did the basics. It could be 612, which you're not doing, but there's one that you are doing. Kedai, that mitzvah is enough that Hashem will save you. this person's got 612 Averas. The whole rest of the Torah, he's not doing anything with it. He's only holding on to Kriya Shema. He should go fight the war. The fact that you don't do all the mitzvahs, that we don't measure up, that we don't do everything that we should, is not a stira to Bitachon. Who is the person who has to go back from war? Who's the person, the soft-hearted person who's not allowed to go fight? He's the person who is afraid because of the averas that are in his hands, and he thinks that because of those averas, Hashem doesn't love him anymore, that Hashem's not going to protect him. If you're a person who's afraid of the averas and your conclusion is, I did averos, and therefore Hashem doesn't love me anymore, so that is the person who's not allowed to go fight a war. Because if you don't have bitachon in Hashem, Hashem tzilcha. Hashem is your shadow. He's a reflection. The bitachon you show in him, he will repay you for that bitachon. So the person who goes back and is not allowed to fight is the person who comes to the conclusion, the mistaken conclusion, that because I have done averos, that Hashem is not going to take care of me anymore. We see that the thought crossed Yaakov Avinu's mind. He goes, maybe the promises aren't going to work because I sullied myself with hate. Okay, you're supposed to think about that. Maybe I'm doing something to the relationship. But the bitachon that Hashem will help me anyway still needs to be there. And if you see what Yaakov Avinu did, he was worried. So one of the things he did was he davened. He prepared himself for war. He davened. Because he knew that he could still count on Hashem to protect him. Masha Ein Kain, which is not the case of the Meraglim. If you'll take a look, number 4, back in Parsha Shlach Lecha, when it discussed the Meraglim, Kalev and Yehoshua told the other Meraglim, Ach b'Hashem al timroidu. Please, don't rebel against Hashem. V'atem al tiru'u es ha'am ha'oretz. Don't make the people, the common people, make them afraid. Excuse me, don't be afraid of the people of the land of Israel. Ki lachmeinu heim. We're going to eat them up. It's going to be easy. Sar tzila me'alehem. V'Hashem itonu lo tiro'um. Hashem is with us. Don't be afraid. So the generation and those Meraglim were told, Al timrodu, don't rebel against Hashem. Yesterday, in the recounting of the story of Meraglim, the pasuk says, Vatirognu ba'ohalechem. Moshe Rabbeinu reminds the Klal Yisrael that you murmured and complained in your tents, v'taymeru, and you said, B'sinas Hashem osanu hotzi onu mi'eretz Mitzrayim. You complained in your tents and you said, Hashem, it's because Hashem hates us. That's why he took us out of Mitzrayim, to hand us over to the Amori in order to totally destroy us. Now take a look at how the Sforno understands this pasuk. What were they afraid of? What was the Klal Yisrael afraid of at the time? So the Sforno says, V'sinas Hashem osanu, Hashem hates us. Al masha avadnu avodah zorah b'Mitzrayim, because we worshipped idols when we were in Mitzrayim. Hashem hates us because of the avera that's in our hand. We worshipped idols in Mitzrayim. Therefore, he's going, he's going to hand us over to the Amori in Eretz Yisrael. Even though Hashem certainly has the power to fight for us and to win the war in Eretz Yisrael, to destroy the Amori, Yitain osonu biyodam lehinakem. He's going to hand us over to the Amori in order to take revenge against us. Hashem hates us. We did averos. We can't have bitachon in him. He's going to hand us over to the Amori in order to destroy us. You see from this Sforno that if a person did an avera, and if his yira of that avera causes him to have a lack of bitachon in Hashem, which is what happened. Because they worshiped the idols in Mitzrayim, they said, we can't count on Hashem to save us. We can't trust in him. That we see from the pasuk in Bamidbar is called merida. That's called rebelling against Hashem. That also is mukhrach, and that also is what Rabbi Rucham points out. A person who says, I'm such a bad person that Hashem's not going to help me anymore. I mean, Hashem's a nice guy, but why would he want to hang out with me? So a person whose yiras chet, his fear of sin, his feeling of unworthiness because of the fact that he just doesn't match up. Okay, we got to work on that. That's not good. But if it causes a person to feel that he can't trust in Hashem anymore, that is called rebelling against Hashem. According to the Seforno, that was the chet of the Meraglim, which is where all the Tisha B'Avs began. It began with a feeling that I'm such a terrible person that Hashem's out to get me, and rightfully so. I deserve it. That's merida. That's rebelling against the Hashem who is rachamov al kol ma'asav. As long as you're thinking about it, as long as you're working the problem, as long as you're trying to turn yourself around, as long as you're trying to head in the right direction, so you're okay. But if you feel that because I did something that's so terrible, so I can't trust in Hashem anymore, that weakens the heart of other Jews. That's not the person who you want going out to fight a war. Because you're fighting a war, you have to be sure that you can trust in the Rebbe Shalom. So that's how we resolve those psukim. Yes, all you need is Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael and Bitachon, which obviously those are related. You say Shema Yisrael, Bitachon, the other things, okay, we got some work to do, but you can go fight the war. Who's the person who goes back? He's the person who feels that my sin is so great that I can't have trust in Hashem anymore. That person needs to get back. There's no business being in an army, because he's going to destroy himself and he's going to take other people down with him. Ad hechan hadvarim magim, to what extent does this go? Take a look at a Gemara very nogeya to today. A well-known Gemara. The Gemara says in Yuma on Daf Tes, Mikdash Rishon Mipnei Macharov. The first Beis HaMikdash, why was it destroyed? Mipnei Shlosha Devarim Shahayu Bo, because of the three great averas that existed within it. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shlichus Domim. You had idol worship, you had immorality, and you had murder. That was the first Beis HaMikdash. Aval Mikdash Sheni, but the second Beis HaMikdash, Shayu Oskim B'Torah B'Mitzvahs U'B'Milos Chasadim. The people were tzaddikim, and they were learning and doing mitzvahs, and they were osking B'Milos Chasadim. Mipnei Macharav, why was it destroyed? The Gemara answers, Mipnei Shahaisa Bo Sinas Chinam. As we know, because of Sinas Chinam, Luvamtecha, this teaches, Sheshkula Sinas Chinam Keneged Shlosh Averos. That Sinas Chinam is equal to the three cardinal sins of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shlichus Domim. That we all know. That part of the Gemara we all know. Unfortunately, we don't read on. And if we read on, we're going to see something very important. Concerning now, going back to the first Beis HaMikdash. Going back to the first Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara continues and said, the people in the first Beis HaMikdash, Reshayim Hayu, they were Reshayim. I think we could agree. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shlichus Domim. Pretty serious. Reshayim Hayu. But they trusted in Hashem. It's true they were Reshayim, but they trusted in Hashem. Also in the Bitachon Rishon, and that was said about the first Beis HaMikdash, the Ksiv, because about the first Beis HaMikdash it says, Rosheha b'shachad yishpatu. Their judges, when they judge, they take bribery. V'kohaneha b'mechir yoru. And the Kohanim, when they paskin, they take money. U'nevei b'kesef yikasamu. And the Nevi'im, when they divine things, they do it also for money. They're all corrupt. Va'al Hashem yishanu. But they depend on Hashem. Leimor. Halo Hashem b'kirbeinu. Hashem's with us. Lo saval aleinu ro. They're doing terrible things. They were taking money to judge court cases. And they said, Hashem's going to help me. It doesn't sound so great, but according to the Gemara, it made it better than Bayesheni. Because they got back to Beis HaMikdash 70 years later. Reshayim b'tolu Bitachon b'Hashem. And then the Gemara says the following, which we'll explain in a little bit. It says, Lefikach hevi aleim hakadosh baruch hu shalosh gezeros. Therefore, since they were Reshayim and Botech in Hashem, Hashem brought 3 decrees upon them. Keneged the shlosh averos, against the 3 averos that they did. Shenemar lechein biglalchem tzion sodei techoresh. Tzion will be plowed like a field. V'Yerushalayim tihiyeh eyad tihiyeh. I think it's a misprint. It's going to be like an island. V'har habayis v'bomos ya'ar. And the har habayis will be like a bomo, will be like a shrine that's out in the woods. That's going to be the punishment. The lefikach needs to be explained. But the heart of the Gemara, which says that they were Reshayim and they were Botech b'Hashem, how does that work? So we find it several times. For example, the Gemara in Sanhedrin. By Achan it says, Choto Yisrael, the Jewish people sinned. Amar Rabbi Abba bar Zavda, Af al pi shechoto, even though they sinned, Yisraelhu. So if he keeps his Shema Yisrael, he keeps his Bitachon. So then he sins, but he has that which is the prized possession of the Klal Yisrael, which is our Bitachon in the Rabbanu Shalom. He's still Yisrael. Furthermore, Darish Bar Kapara, Ezo hi parsha katana shakol gufei haTorah tuluyim bo, which is the statement that everything in the Torah, the whole body of Torah, depends on this pasuk. So Bar Kapara said it's the pasuk b'kol dorachecha da'ehu, know him in all your ways, v'hu yeyasher orchesecha, and that will straighten out your paths. B'kol darchecha da'ehu, know him wherever you go. Amar Rava said, afilu l'devar aveira. Know Hashem, have bitachon in Hashem, be thinking about Hashem, af l'davar aveira. Rashi says, what does it mean, l'davar aveira? Afilu la'avor aveira. Even when a person's going out to commit a sin. Don't make it worse by not having bitachon in Hashem at that time. Furthermore, the Rabbeinu Yonah brings this. It says, V'amar Rava, afilu l'devar aveira. And this appears not in our Gemara, but it appears in the Ein Yaakov. It says, Teda can prove it to you, the Amri Inchi, because people have an expression. There's a folk saying, Ganva, a thief, apum b'chartarta, when he's in the tunnel breaking into somebody's house and he's afraid he's going to get caught, Rachmana Kori. He calls out, Hashem, help me. B'kol darchecha da'ehu, even when he's on his way to do an aveira. Hinei zbayar l'cha, the Rabbeinu Yonah says, this makes it clear to you, ki mikra hazeh omar al in habitachon. This pasuk, b'kol darchecha da'ehu, means, not know him, means to trust him. V'ki gufei Torah tuluyim b'bitachon. It's about bitachon, da'ehu means have bitachon in him, and this the Gemara said, kol gufei haTorah are dependent on it. But kol darchecha da'ehu, even on the way to do an aveira. And the Yalkut says, afilu Rasha ubotech b'Hashem. If a person's a Rasha, but he's botech in Hashem, chesed yisovavenu. He'll be surrounded by chesed, even if he's a Rasha. Which brings us back to that Rasha. You see that 4 different places, there's a concept of Rasha botech b'Hashem. And you see from Rabbi Rucham, okay, look, being a Rasha is not great, obviously. We want to be tzaddikim b'tech b'Hashem. But a Rasha who loses his bitachon, he's even worse. A Russia is over 612 or 613, but he has Shema Yisrael and he's Botech B'Hashem, so he can go fight. Because he held on to the thing which is the Iker. Why is that okay? The Maharshal explains. Remember, going back to the Gemara said, since they were Reshayim and Botech B'Hashem, since they had Bitachon, therefore I'm going to bring upon them these three gezeros, these three decrees, these three harsh decrees. What was number one? Tzion b'sadeh techarish, that Tzion will be plowed like a field. Says the Maharshal, Ratzon lomar shetolu mihas bitchonim bo. At least they trusted in Hashem. Therefore, Mevi Hakadosh Baruch Hu Aleihim Gimel Paranios Al Gimel Averis. Hashem gave them three punishments for their three Averis. Lo Bekilyon Gomor. But he didn't wipe them out completely. Kamo Bestom, which was the case in Sodom, that they were wiped out completely. They were told, Tzion Sadeh Techarish. Because you had Bitachon in me, so Tzion will be plowed up like a field. Why that expression, that it will be plowed like a field? Listen to the Maharshal. Tzion Kasadeh Techarish, V'hiyeh Ra'ui L'Zriya. Because when you plow a field, then you can plant. So if you have Bitachon, even though it's a Russia, but you're dealing with a plowed field, that means it's possible to rebuild. It's possible to plant again. And also Yerushalayim li'iyim, that it'll be this desolate island. The harabayas l'bomos, it means that there are things, there's wood there, there's a bomos there, a platform built there, something can be built upon. It's something for it to grow. Sheyem mihas devar hatzomeach, there's something that can sprout forth from there. V'lo kilyun gomer kamo b'stayim, not like a total destruction like we found in Sodom, where it says, "V'Hashem himtir gafris v'eish v'yafuchas ha'orim v'tzemach ha'adama," that everything was totally eradicated. Nothing could grow there anymore. You go to the Dead Sea, nothing grows. Bayis Rishon, they were Reshayim and Botech B'Hashem. Therefore, the punishment was, okay, there's consequences for that. Okay, Tzion Churban Bayis Rishon, Tzion Kasadeh Yecharesh. Tzion's going to be plowed up like a field, but it's going to be plowed up like a field. That means you can plant again. And the truth is, that 70 years they got the Beis HaMikdash back. Rav Goldberg puts it like this. He says, Bayis Rishon, they were Reshayim and Botech B'Hashem. They were evil and they trusted in Hashem. And they got the Beis HaMikdash back 70 years later. Bayis Sheni, they were tzaddikim and they had sinas chinam, and we're still waiting. So think about it. First bias, Reshayim, Botech B'Hashem. 70 years later, they planted, they got the Beis HaMikdash back. Second Beis HaMikdash, they were osek, the Torah, mitzvahs, gemilas chasadim. But they had sinas chinam. And where does sinas chinam come from? A lack of bitachon. Because if you had bitachon in Hashem, why do you hate that guy? What did he do to you? Anything that happens because it came from Hashem, why do you hate him? He has more, he did this. Botech B'Hashem has no room in his heart. He's too filled with Hashem to have room in his heart for sinas chinam. Sinas chinam comes from a lack of bitachon. So it said, Reshayim with bitachon get the Beis HaMikdash back. Yes, there's consequences, but they get it back relatively quickly. Tzaddikim, who have no bitachon, as shown through their sinas chinam, still waiting. That's what the Maharshal is saying. If you have bitachon, you can always rebuild. The world thinks, we're coming up, it's Tisha B'Av already. That means Elul is mamash around the corner. Less than 3 weeks. Elul means tshuva. So people think tshuva means that you have to eat yourself up, that you're a bad person, that you have to feel bad. The Masorah of Slobodka was, Elul's coming, you got to turn yourself around and put yourself on the right track. The Chavos HaLevavos says that the first condition, it's not the first, one of the conditions in being a Baal Bitachon is to know that Hashem will help you even if you don't deserve it. Because if you think He only helps those who deserve it, so then, okay, you'll say, Hashem's, He wants to help, but a guy like me, forget it. So everybody's going to think that way, and nobody's going to have Bitachon. So as we're thinking about why all these things are happening in the world, to the Klal Yisrael and to us as individuals, and we have to think, because we have to think we're not a person, we're not ma'asav, and then we won't get His Rahmanas. So we have to think about it. But we can't think about it in a way that makes us sad and depressed, or chas v'sholom think that Hashem doesn't love us and care about us anymore because of what we did. Not His fault, it's because of the way I behaved. He still loves us. And if we're thinking about it, we're still ma'asav. If we're still ma'asav, then we're fitting for His Rahmanas, which is what we need. So we're not free not to think about it, but we can't allow the thoughts that we have about it become something that in any way impinges on our trust and confidence that Hashem will help us and He will fight for us and He will give us the insight that we want. If we fall into that trap, that's called merida. That's rebelling. That's the meraglim. That's what got us into this Tisha B'Av mess to begin with. So we don't think we're such big tzaddikim. Yesh v'yesh. There are those who say that if you took Rabbi Akiva Eger, the Chavetz Chaim, and you plopped them into Los Angeles 2021, they might have flattened out like a potato latke. If they saw what was going on over here, and we send our kids to schools, and we learn, and we do mitzvahs, and we steig. So it could be we're bigger tzaddikim than we think we are. Even if we think we're not such big tzaddikim, and maybe we're noted to the side of Reshayimness, because we're missing some of what needs to exist in terms of our Torah and mitzvos. Shema Yisrael, Bitachon, thinking, trying to improve, having the confidence that Hashem will help us and fight for us. That's what will bring the Beis HaMikdash back. We started out by saying that a person who has no deya, asur l'rachem alav. The Gemara there also says that if a person has deya, if he does think, and he thinks correctly, not in a way that makes him depressed or to think he's far from Hashem, but he thinks correctly, ki'ilu bana Beis HaMikdash b'yamav. It's as if he rebuilds the Beis HaMikdash in his days. Why? Because both deya and mikdash were given between two names of Hashem. By mikdash it says Hashem, mikdash Hashem in a pasuk, and by deya it says Kel Deos Hashem. It says Kel and then Hashem at the end. Deya is in the middle. As Rabbi Miller put it, if you see someone walking down the street and you don't know who he is, but on one side is the Satmar Rebbe and the other side is a Lubavitcher Rebbe, you know that the man in the middle is Mashiach. So if you have Hashem on one side, and you have Hashem on the other side, and you have Deya in the middle, and you have Mikdash in the middle, you know that those are very, very important things. A person without it, asur l'rachem olav, he's not a person. A person with it is actively in the process of rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash, and should happen Be'ezus Hashem b'mheira of Yameinu. Amen.